I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 416. Thank you all for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week, and welcome aboard to those of you who are new. Welcome back to those of you who are not. Glad to have you here today. I'm not glad about what it is we're going to be talking about, and you can probably guess. But so it's not so much of a talking as it is a ranting, so buckle up for that. But first, I want to thank the members of the Reformation Gun Club who make this show possible. This week, I want to thank Curtis from Junction City, Kansas, Mitch from Stockbridge, Michigan, Ron from Lexington Park, Maryland, William from Bentonville, Arkansas, Jim from Rincon, Georgia, Stephen from Spotsylvania, Virginia, Tony from Little Elm, Texas, John from Spokane, Washington, and Tim from Finlayson, Minnesota. Thank you all so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio possible, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club for your contributions and your efforts to make this show continue into heading on towards our 10th season. Folks, if you would like to join these good people, if you appreciate what we do here at Armed Lutheran Radio, and if you would like to join these fine folks in supporting the show, get some cool Armed Lutheran swag and invitations to our monthly online hangouts, visit reformationgunclub.com. Sign up today. It's just $36 a year, and come and join us. Get access to all of the exclusive content and all of that good stuff. Come join us for our September online hangout coming later this month. We would love to have you join us. Again, that's reformationgunclub.com. And before I get started with my rant, speaking of Armed Lutheran swag, for those of you who have recently renewed your memberships and are waiting for swag packs and t-shirts to go out, never fear, I have not lost your orders. For those of you who are longtime listeners to the show or recent listeners to the show, you know we've recently gone through a move, and it only recently did I manage to get all of the t-shirts and the t-shirt press and all that stuff unpacked and find room for it. So that stuff got done this weekend, and those swag packs and all the goodies will be going out this week, so never fear. Okay. It has now been more than 72 hours since the terrible events at Appalachian High School in Georgia this week. I try to refrain from commenting about these sorts of events in the first 72 hours. It's a rule that John Correa from Active Self-Protection, I first heard him talk about it. Makes a good deal of sense, and if you have paid attention to any of these sorts of events in the past, you know that the information that comes out in the immediate aftermath of any kind of shooting like this, any kind of tragedy like this, most of that information is completely false and contradictory to what the actual news is. So you're better off not to comment for 72 hours at least, because the truth will eventually come out, unless, of course, we're talking about the Las Vegas shooting, which we still don't know anything about, which is amazingly perplexing. But still, in the first 72 hours, most of what you hear about it is just gonzo BS. There's still some truth sprinkled in, and it's hard to tell what's true and what's not. So you're better off just wait 72 hours, and by then you should know what's going on, and we do. And as of this recording, as I'm recording this on Saturday night, just hearing about within the last hour a mass shooting on I-75 in Kentucky with a suspect still at large. And hopefully by the time you hear this, the suspect in that incident will be in custody. That incident took place in the area of exit 49 on I-75 south of Lexington. If that is not the case, and the suspect is not in custody yet, authorities in Kentucky are urging anyone who sees the person not to approach him. He's to be considered armed and dangerous. If you know anything or if you've seen anything, please contact the Loudoun-Lauren County 911 Center by calling 911 if you are in that area, or by calling 606-878-7000. Couch this guy's name is Joseph Couch. He is considered a suspect. He is considered armed and dangerous. As of this point, as I said, on Saturday night, there are 7 injuries, no reported deaths. Couch is a white male, 5 foot 10 inches tall, and roughly 154 pounds soaking wet. That's pretty much all we know currently. And so I'm not going to get into any more of that, just to warn folks, if this is still an issue tomorrow when this show comes out, there's my public service announcement. Now, back to the rant. I'm tired, folks. Sick and tired. And I suspect a good many of you are as well. So I need to get this off my chest. I am sick and tired of worthless pieces of excrement like this guy in Kentucky, or the shooter at the Appalachia High School, or his worthless father, or the loser who decided to take a shot at Trump back in June. These people who time and time and time again force us to defend our Second Amendment rights from the cowardly leftists who want to take our guns away, our rights away, because they just provide new excuses for the gun banners like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the Democrat Party and the entire corporate media. Those people are just waiting, like Dianne Feinstein, the late Dianne Feinstein, who kept a copy of a gun ban bill in her desk and trotted it out, just updated some model numbers, specific model numbers to be banned every time there was this kind of a school shooting. She just trotted out the same garbage legislation every time. She was a horrible piece of garbage herself, and this is exactly, but she's indicative of the mindset of the left. They're just waiting for something like this to happen so they can trot out. It gives them an excuse to pivot to gun control. And for Kamala Harris, who has a terrible record and is an awful politician, despite what the media is trying to convince you of otherwise, this is a way to distract from her record and her awfulness. They're just waiting for another excuse to attack our rights. And there's a never-ending stream of morons and fools and worthless people who are perfectly willing to give them the blood to dance in. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the danger of freedom. Dangerous freedom, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who referred to it that way. Correct me if I'm wrong there. The danger of freedom is that some people will abuse their freedoms. And unfortunately, an additional danger is that government will try to make everyone else pay for it. Some of them will pay with their blood, others with the loss of their rights. And this is in no way meant to diminish the lives lost in any way. I am absolutely heartbroken for the victims of these shootings and their families, and they are constantly in my prayers. But the price that is constantly paid for making gun control a political football, mass shootings a political football, is lives lost and freedoms lost. And I can hear it now. Well, Lloyd, if you're so heartbroken, why don't you just ban the guns like the AR-15 and this will never happen again? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the voice of the castrati in this country. The safety-first crowd that thinks safety and lives without worry and without danger are a right somehow, and who seem to believe the unicorn farts that they're being fed by the government and by the media about how if we only take away guns, there'd be no gun violence. In fact, no one would ever die. And my answer to those people is no. No, 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 hell no. We have talked at length on this show about this subject many, many times. Why are my rights, why are your rights subject to infringement just because some people choose to abuse those rights? And what other right do we have? What inalienable right can government abridge simply because irresponsible and evil people do bad things? Well, we used to argue that this didn't apply to the First Amendment, but we've seen that that's no longer true as the media and the Democrats and the people who are supposedly champions of the voice of the people and freedom of speech, they have gone to great unimaginable lengths to restrict people's freedoms if they express the wrong ideas. Freedom of speech, you see, is only free if your speech is the correct speech. And it's the same way that they're now treating the First Amendment the way they treat guns. The same people who seek to silence us for stating facts like men and women are different, that there are only two genders, or that abortion is murder, or a fetus is actually a human child, or that marriage is an inherent good, or maybe that citizens should come before illegal migrants. Those same people will tell you, oh, we don't oppose the Second Amendment, but it should only apply to the right kinds of guns. Revolvers and hunting rifles and shotguns. Remember Joe Biden back when he was vice president talking about you only need a shotgun. You just pump around through the door and, the bad guys will run away. These same people will argue that the Second Amendment only applies to the kinds of guns available at the time of the signing of the Constitution, but not modern firearms. Joe Biden was out there rambling about deer in Kevlar vests again this week, which is just the stupidest thing I think I've ever heard any politician say. But he keeps saying it as though it's somehow witty and intelligent. And interestingly, they argue this using modern forms of communication, mind you, ironically, not just the ones available back in 1787. We're soon approaching Constitution Day, by the way. That's September 17th, the 237th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. And the Constitution today would be completely unrecognizable to the founders. It's nothing like, and it's being interpreted in ways the founders never anticipated. They would be spinning in their graves. But I'm sorry, way off on a tangent. I apologize. Back to my rant. I am sick and tired. Back to the sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of this fight that we have to go through every day, every week, every month, every year in this country just to preserve the natural right of self-defense. All because some idiot, some pasty white tweaker who can't get a girlfriend, or some mental mushroom who's living in mommy's basement playing video games, or some gangbanger in the hood decides to misuse our rights, the rights that our founders risked their lives to recognize, and that generations of men and women in our armed forces have fought to protect. And that our venal politicians swear to protect as well. And I'm sick of the sycophantic media. Every article, I don't know whether you noticed this, but every article that I read this week about the shooting always was sure to include a paragraph about Georgia's gun laws, their right to carry law. They have constitutional carry in Georgia, which means, for those of you who don't know, that you adults without a criminal record are allowed to carry a firearm without a permit. As though that has anything to do with a school shooting committed by a 14-year-old kid. A 14-year-old boy who can't legally possess a firearm under Georgia law or any other state law or federal law. He goes out and he commits this horrible crime, and oh, by the way, Georgia's gun laws are really lax, don't you know? And if that just gives people the impression that if only Georgia's gun laws were more strict, this would not have happened, which is idiotic. But Americans are idiotic, and they just lap it up. You know, the reason, another tangent, the reason that our schools suck so badly is because stupid kids grow up to be stupid adults, and it's really easy to manipulate them and control them. And they believe whatever they're fed by the people that they assume are in authority. The Gun Violence Policy Center or whatever says Georgia allows people to carry guns without a permit. Whoa, that's awful. No wonder they have this terrible thing happen to them. Again, the castrati. There are a couple of things that these articles and the politicians and all discussions that I've seen seem to gloss over or completely ignore. And the main one is that phrase that I absolutely hate, which is the good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun. And we have often argued on the show that I don't like that phrase. The only thing that stops a good guy or bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. What it takes is a good guy with the determination to do something. Unlike certain police officers in Uvalde, Texas and Parkland, Florida. But that's another story. In this case, an armed resource officer, I think two of them actually, rushed to confront the shooter, and he had surrendered within 7 minutes of firing the first shot. And yet, we still have politicians and school board members and teachers' unions fighting all over the country to prevent armed resource officers or armed staff in schools. Rather than celebrating the heroism of those officers, unlike, as I said, unlike the cowards in Uvalde, Texas last year, or in Parkland, Florida several years back, the cowardly pieces of crap who waited in the hall and listened to kids getting killed doing nothing, unlike those guys, remember those guys were law enforcement, including SWAT. At Appalachia High School, the school resource officers rushed in and confronted the shooter and stopped the attack before it got worse. You had dozens of officers standing in the hall in Uvalde, Texas, doing nothing. And in this case, you've got two guys rushing in to confront the shooter. Those guys are heroes. And we need more of them. We need them in every school. And we've talked at length on this show and on others about the need for armed staff, or at the very least, armed resource officers, the need to harden our schools against these kinds of threats. All right, here's another tangent. We're allowing hundreds of terrorists, it's been revealed, hundreds of terrorists into the country via our southern border, which is wide open. The easiest mass casualty event in America would be to attack a school. If some terrorist decided they wanted to kill a bunch of Americans. And why is that? Because not only because you have a mass concentration of small children who can't fight back, you have generally a lack of armed defenders and schools with lax security. Schools that rely on gun-free zone signs to keep them safe. And God forbid, if that were to ever happen, this is how cynical I am, if that were to ever happen, the cry from Democrats would still be about gun control. Yes, I believe in my heart of hearts that Democrats would see a terrorist attack on a school as an opportunity not to secure our borders, but to attack the rights of law-abiding, innocent Americans. And let's also not forget that this school had an enhanced security system, armed security on premise, and they still suffered a tragic shooting. And that's very simply, the reason is really very simple. And it's not because of guns. It's because of determined evil people will find a way. The Bible tells us that we're wicked and evil from birth in our hearts. There are people who are determined to commit evil acts. And a gun law is not going to stop them. And in some cases, having armed security is not going to stop them. It's not going to stop them from trying. In this case, it stopped them from doing more damage. But the problem is not one of guns. Now let's talk about the father in this case. I have long advocated, much to the surprise of people who heard me do it, to listeners, to other podcasters, that I have advocated holding parents responsible for failing to secure their firearms. I remember being on I think I was a guest on, I think it was the Polite Society podcast with Paul Lathrop and others. And this has been years ago. It was back maybe 2017, 2018, long before COVID. And I suggested that parents should be held accountable, at the very least in civil court, if not criminal court. And other members on the show were surprised to hear me say it. They couldn't believe that I felt this way. If it's a crime to allow your vicious dog off a chain to maul a small child, shouldn't it be a crime to allow your mentally ill kid to shoot one? Yeah, it should. We talk constantly about the need for responsibility, for responsible gun ownership, for safe and secure storage of your firearms. Well, you can't say it and not do it. You can't say it and not hold people responsible when they fail to do those things. This kid had a history. There was a threat against the school last year. Bad enough that the FBI got involved. They investigated. Unfortunately, they could not conclusively prove that the threats came from this kid. And the dad told investigators at the time that his son did not have, and I quote, unfettered access to his hunting rifles. But it turns out that was a lie, because he did. Daddy decided that the best way to bond with his troubled son was to buy him a gun as a Christmas present. So yeah, Just like the parents in the Oxford school shooting in Michigan last year, this guy is responsible for what happened with his son. We can't complain about the failure of families in America when it comes to our youth and then turn around when we're talking about guns and say, well, the parents shouldn't be held responsible when the kid shoots up a school. Now, there are limits to that, obviously. If the child stole the guns, for example. But I think it goes further than that. I think even the mother of the Newton Schooltown shooter, way back 12 years ago, even that creepy kid's mom was responsible in a way for what happened. And she unfortunately paid for it with her life. But still, her Asperger's son, the creepy basement dweller who spent all of his time playing violent video games and fantasizing about racking up real kill counts, she still took him shooting and trained him in gun handling. Now, I'm as big a proponent as anyone of teaching kids about guns and gun safety, but I'm sorry, that was a horrible idea. The problem is, for that woman and for the parents of the Oxford school shooter and the parents of, I'm sure, the Santa Fe school shooter in Texas years ago, the parents of this latest shooter, all the parents, we don't want to admit if there's something wrong with our kids. We don't want to think about that. We want them to be normal. We want them to have normal, healthy lives. That's not always the case. Sin has corrupted us, and not everyone's normal. And I know we want them to grow out of whatever phase or whatever issues they may be going through, but when it comes to guns, you can't take that chance. Because they could take their lives. At the very least, they could take their own lives. They could take your life. They could take other people's lives. We've got to be clear-eyed about that. And I talked about this in episode 409, if you want to go back and listen to that. When your kid is having trouble in school, when your kid is depressed, when they won't open up, they won't talk, they're angry, maybe they've been diagnosed with some sort of a disorder like Asperger's or clinical depression or whatever, you can't give them the keys to the gun cabinet. You can't buy them guns for Christmas. You can't take them to the range and teach them to be a shooter. What you need to do is throw away the key. You've got to put what's best for everyone, for your child and for everyone, ahead of my rights. Consider storing your guns somewhere else. At the very least, find a friend or family member who will keep them temporarily. At worst, you sell them. But this guy in Georgia didn't do that. He knew his son was having issues, and he still bought his kid a gun. And that brings me to where I'm really, 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 really sick and tired. And that has to do with the authorities in this case. Not the two guys, not the teachers who, pushed the alarm and alerted authorities, not the two resource officers who stopped this guy. I'm talking about law enforcement, local and federal. This kid's father begged authorities a year ago, in his own words, can't we just put our arms around this kid and get him through the school year? Because he was constantly having to go to school to meet with staff about his troubled kid. So just like so many previous shooters, not just school shooters, mass shooters, this kid was on the radar of law enforcement. Not just local law enforcement, the FBI. The FBI interviewed him and the dad. And then they dropped the ball by referring the case to the local authorities. And that never goes badly, does it? The local authorities, the local sheriff's department, then failed to inform the school because they said the school year was over. So there was nobody to call. Well, I'm sorry, but that's just garbage. That's BS. Because the school year, in reality, is never over. Administration is always there, year round. Just because the school campus closes for the summer and the teachers go home and the kids go home, it doesn't mean the main office, the administration office is closed and the superintendent and all the staff are gone. I'm sorry. They could have called administration for the entire system and said, hey, this kid at this school is going to be graduating, and we had this problem. But they didn't do that. They said, school's out, nothing we can do. So, but they could have. And then the administration could have found this kid, figured out where he was potentially going to be next year, kept an eye out to see if he registered again for the new school year. And when he did, warned Appalachia High School that they had a potential problem kid coming. And here's where I'm going to really go out on a limb in a very similar way to 5 or 6 years ago when I went out on a limb about holding parents accountable. I want the parents of kids like this on a watch list. Not the NICS list, not the National Instant Crime Background Check System. I don't want them, to be denied a purchase without due process. That's not what I'm suggesting. I want a system that keeps track of troubled kids. Specific kinds of troubled kids. Troubled kids who are potentially violent, who might potentially shoot up a school. Kids who have threatened to do just that, who have threatened to kill their schoolmates or shoot up a school or whatever, or shoot up a school bus, blah, 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 whatever. If they have threatened violence against other students, staff, or schools, they should be on a list. What unfortunately ends up happening is these kids end up suspended or expelled, or most likely they get shopped off to some different campus or a different school system, and everybody sort of loses track. Instead, I want authorities to be notified that if that kid's parents or their guardians purchases a firearm, I want authorities to know. Why is that, you ask? Why do we care? Appalachia High School is why, for starters. But oh, Lloyd, you're talking about gun registration. Shut up. That's the voice of the pro-gun castrati now, apparently. I'm talking about tracking troubled kids. Our society, big pharma, big medicine, entertainment, media, is creating an absolute ton of troubled kids. And when it comes to school shootings, we do not have a gun problem. We have a troubled kid problem. And when you mix all of that confusion, all the mixed messages, the hormones, the mixed messaging about violence and entertainment, and among social advocates, remember, silence is violence and words are violence, and refusing to accept a person's mental illness, essentially, that's somehow violence too. Well, you mix all that together and then toss in an irresponsible adult with guns, and you end up with Newtown Elementary in Connecticut, or Oxford High School in Michigan, or Santa Fe High School here in Texas, or now, unfortunately, Appalachia High School in Georgia. This is, to some extent, a gun problem, but it's not a gun problem that can be solved by restricting the rights of innocent Americans. It's not a gun problem that can be solved with gun bans or whatever. It's solved with a serious effort to harden our schools, a recognition that armed staff, or at the very least armed resource officers, are critical, and a better effort to keep track of these threats and not let them fall through the cracks, as our law enforcement agencies seem to constantly do. I'm sick and tired, and as I've said, and what I'm sick and tired of is that we keep seeing these shootings. We keep finding out that, oh, by the way, the FBI or some law enforcement agency knew about this kid a year prior and then dropped the ball. Every one of these incidents is preventable, and not by banning guns, not by taking away people's AR-15s. Remember, the Santa Fe, Texas school shooter used his father's shotgun and a revolver. These incidents are preventable by being honest about the problem, providing more resources for parents and schools who are dealing with troubled kids, hardening schools, arming staff or resource officers or both, responsible parenting would be nice, and law enforcement agencies that do more than the bare minimum required and don't let these kids fall through the cracks only to show up in the headlines having killed people. It's a complicated problem. It's not that complicated to solve. There are things that we can do, but we spend all of our time wound up about guns and nothing ever gets solved. And short of all that stuff that I mentioned, maybe we should try these school shooters as adults and then fry them in the electric chair on national TV so that it's a warning to others who might want to, who think that becoming the next school shooter is a cool move for their clicks on Instagram. And prosecuting jackasses like this latest kid's father for his reckless and irresponsible parenting. The fourth commandment calls on all of us to honor father and mother and all in authority. But sadly, in way, way too many cases, authorities in this nation, from parents on up, right up to the federal level, are not behaving honorably. And it's getting people killed. And that has got to change. Okay, rant over. That is all from me today. If you have any comments or any questions, any thoughts on this, anything I said, any complaints, criticisms, or if you have your own ideas about what can be done, I'd love to hear them. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback and leave us a message. We would love to hear your thoughts and respond in a future episode if necessary, or directly if you so prefer. If you have any suggestions for a future episode, topic you would like us to discuss, please do so. We would love to hear from you. Not sure what we're going to be doing next week. Hopefully we'll try to get a variety show or another get together with the pastor. And hopefully by the time you hear this, the guy in Kentucky is in custody and there are no fatalities as a result of the shooting on I-75 in Kentucky today. Our prayers continue to go out with all the victims of the I-75 shooting and the victims and their families in the Appalachia High School shooting. Hope you'll join us in praying for them, keeping those people in your prayers. And that is all for me today. Until next week, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.